This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design and development from a group of people with one thing in common. We love Drupal. This is episode 469, Drupal's popularity and developer experience. On today's show, we are talking about Drupal's popularity and developer experience, what could be better, and things that are great with our guest, Nathan Dentzau. We'll also cover Spam Master as our module of the week. Welcome to Talking Drupal. Our guest today is Nathan Dentzau. Nathan is the owner-operator of Dentzau, a product development company turning ambitious ideas into scalable digital experiences. Nathan is a triple certified Drupal expert with 2 decades of software engineering experience. Welcome to the show, and thank you for joining us for the last almost 4 weeks.
Hello, and I'm excited for today's conversation.
I'm Nick Laughlin, founder at Light Development, and today my co-host is John Bacozzi, solution architect at EPAM.
Hello, internet friends.
And now to talk about our module of the week, all the way from DrupalCon Barcelona, let's turn it over to Martin Anderson-Klutz, a senior solutions engineer at Acquia and a maintainer of a number of Drupal modules and recipes of his own. Martin, what do you have for us this week?
Thanks, Nick. Have you ever wanted to defend your Drupal website from web form spam using a constantly updating list of known bad actors? There's a module for that. It's called Spam Master, and it was created in March 2018 by Pedro Alves, and it has 8.x-1.99 and 8.x-2.50 versions available, the latter of which supports Drupal versions 8 through 11. It is actively maintained and has security coverage. There is documentation on spammaster.org, and it currently has no open issues, which is always quite a feat, but this module is also officially in use by 449 sites, according to Drupal.org. Now, Spam Master is a website protection technology that was originally created all the way back in 2012 and is used across sites based on a variety of technologies, including WordPress, Drupal, Joomla, and more. It uses a variety of techniques to identify and block malicious actors, including real-time block lists, honeypot traps, comment analysis, and more. By maintaining a list of known bad actors tracked by IP address and email address as used, you can also benefit from a network effect by being able to identify them based on malicious behavior on any of the thousands of sites using Spam Master. The module claims compatibility with a variety of forms, including registration, comments, commerce, and more. It includes a variety of reports you can use to understand the amount of spam your site is receiving, and the module can automatically send you an email if it believes your site has reached level 3 of spam targeting. Spam Master does use licenses on spammaster.org, but free licenses are available. So let's talk about Spam Master.
If you've reached level 3 of spam targeting, is this like DEF CON where like level 1 is the worst, or level 5, or like out of how many levels?
It's a great question, and I had a similar thought. I'm not exactly sure how that rating scale goes, but interesting that it does have different tiers and can automatically send out alerts based on sort of perceived level of attack.
Yeah. How does this, because Martin, I know that you also maintain the Cloudflare module, like how does this compare with some of the firewall rules you can put into Cloudflare? I'm assuming because it's using like a list that's always being updated, it's probably a little bit more reactive to changes in the kind of like spamiverse, if you will.
So so there's a couple of things there. So number one, I feel like this, at least, and again, I haven't used this one personally, so I can't, vouch exactly for how it works, but I feel like it's more specifically geared towards sort of like comment and form based spam. There is notionally some sort of like DDoS type protection in there, but I feel like the overall intent feels like it's more, people using form-based attacks and, cross-site scripting and some of those other things. Whereas something like Cloudflare or the other one that I'm familiar with that may have some parallels is more like the Akamai sort of reputation-based management of bad actors, where I feel like, again, it's you sort of have the benefit of that network effect, but particularly like the Akamai one is more like any kind of like DDoS behavior or like malicious queries or a bunch of other things. So probably broader based, but I'm sure, like the cost, particularly of something like Akamai, is, certainly going to be much higher than I'm sure what sites are going to look at for using something like Spam Master.
One other question I had about this is because it kind of reads like it's tying into some service. Is it Drupal only, or is there a Spam Master service that it's integrating with?
So the real-time block list is sort of the service that having the license effectively gives you access to. As far as that's sort of my understanding, and that's the piece that you can use across, sort of, Drupal or WordPress or Joomla sites can
Okay.
all use that.
Okay. Oh, they have a dashboard. It is a service, and they have a dashboard that tells you the last 10 IP address and email threats. That's kind of cool.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. So if you go to spammaster.org, you can kind of learn all about it. And I think like I don't know if we said this and I missed it, but is that like open source? Is it like a nonprofit? Like what is spammaster.org? Does anybody know?
So it sounds like it was created by the agency that the Pedro Alves is from. Let me just see if I can track that down real quick, because it does say on here the TechGasp is the agency behind Spam Master.
Hmm.
So I would say it's probably not like true open source in the sense of like you could take their source code and spin up another site that does the same thing.
Yeah.
But I think it's notionally aligned with open source CMS technologies.
Got it. I mean, listen, at the end of the day, less spam is good for everybody. So whether it's this or I was using for a little while, I was using Honeypot, and then Antibot, I think was
Antibot?
another
Yeah.
module. And even in the last, I don't know, probably the last couple of years, I guess, those have kind of worked less reliably, and I've gone to like more Cloudflare rules and Cloudflare, blocks to like, hey, are you actually a real person trying to fill this form out? But this sounds like a nice Drupal based solution that you could implement that's going to maybe be a little bit more robust in the fact that it's going to be able to not pop people with a blocker page basically.
Yeah.
I think one of the potential downsides of the increased pervasiveness of AI based technologies is that a lot of the bots are much more sophisticated today than they were even 3 or 4 years ago, and so I think that's certainly part of why some of those things that are more sort of simple honeypot type traps are less effective now.
Yeah. That's exactly what I was going to say. And I think I had a realization that the amount of load that those anti-spam servers are having to do is probably a lot higher too, just because of that. Like, for example, I've noticed this is obviously anecdotal, but two things I've noticed. One, I get more spam in Gmail now than I used to, and email. Like, if I sent myself an email, like from my phone, just to you know as a reminder or something, that always used to be just like instant. It was just on my computer immediately. And now I mean, it's not a long delay, but it's like 5 seconds, 10 seconds. And, I found myself wondering about that the other day. Like, is that my network? Or is Google just handling such a flood of spam at this point that even a simple message like that just takes a few seconds to get through the queue? And I imagine it's a combination of both of those. But I think we're really, where spam is always a battle. I think we're uh, on the losing side at the moment. We had a good run, I think, of 5 or 6 years where the tools, like, you had to remember to put the tools in, but they worked, and you didn't really have to worry about it too much unless you were really uh, a high profile target. But at the moment, I'm seeing, like, if you like, even the tools that you used to use just don't work. Like, I'm in the market for new tools, and like John said, things like Cloudflare really are the most reliable at the moment.
Yeah, Yeah, I definitely agree with that, and I would probably add that my own site relies on Cloudflare for some similar protections, but this is definitely a good tool. On one of the things on the spammaster.org website, they talk about their database that they use for that real-time block list as being top 5 in the world in terms of being able to document those spam threats and so on. So definitely a solution worth exploring. I'm not sure at what point you have to get into, like a paid license or those kinds of things, but certainly worth a look, I would say, if spam is a growing problem for your site, the way many of the site owners that I talk to are, having those same kinds of problems.
All right, Martin, thank you so much for, as always, a great module of the week. Before you drop off, how can people reach you? And are you giving a talk in Barcelona if people are listening from there? Actually, never mind. If people want to, this is going to
watch that video later.
Yeah, if people want to watch your talk on video, what's the title and where can they find it on YouTube?
So I'm giving a talk with Mark Casillas, who's been on the podcast a few times as well. We're giving a talk about an update on the recipes initiative. That'll be on Thursday. We're also moderating a BOF, which won't be recorded. And then I'm also helping to moderate a panel discussion about AI tools with Drupal tomorrow as well.
Awesome. Well, I'll be looking for those after they come out. But as always, thank you so much, and we'll see you next week.
All right. See you next week.
Okay, so welcome back, Nathan. I hope you enjoyed Disney last week. But
I did until my laptop broke. So I was disappointed I missed the AI conversation last week.
Yeah, you'll have to give it a listen and let us know what you think. So, Nathan, can you frame our conversation today? Why do you think that Drupal has a popularity problem?
I think it has a popularity problem with new developers, right? And this topic that we're talking about today in this conversation, and I want it to be a conversation, right? I'm not the expert on why Drupal has a problem, or may or may not have one. Why I wanted to talk about this was when I went to Drupal GovCon in Maryland back in August. I had a several-hour conversation with other developers and agency owners who all brought up the same topic, which is finding new, from an agency owner perspective, is finding new developers who are interested in working in Drupal is increasingly difficult than it was, let's say, a decade ago. And on the other side is from a developer perspective, I had a really interesting conversation with a gentleman named Christian. He works for Civic Actions. And it was a fantastic conversation. And other Civic Action employees came around, and I want to specifically call them out because they were awesome to talk with. And, one thing that they pointed out is like, Christian was like, look at us. Like, when we all started working at Drupal or in Drupal, we didn't have kids. We were young. We were, ambitious. And now, he was like, the average age of a person working in Drupal is much older than it was, or much higher than it was, the age number than it was when Drupal was first introduced, or maybe even a decade ago, right? But the average age is not going down. The average age is probably going up, right? And I see it, right? I don't go to Drupal events as often since COVID, but the ones that I do, I run into the same people. I don't see a lot of new faces as often as I feel like I did a decade ago when I started being involved in the community. And maybe that's because I was new. But I think that it's not a secret that Drupal's struggling to acquire market share with the introduction of Drupal CMS, right? That was Dries' whole keynote, right? It was being competitive. So I think that should hopefully frame our conversation today, but also make sure that this is not the issues that maybe we're going to discuss today are not a reflection of any group or individual, right? This is a community that is made of volunteers. The model of the Drupal community is held on a pedestal by other open source communities, right? But I think it's worth discussing how frameworks like Laravel and Next.js that are much younger frameworks, their popularity has skyrocketed over the last several years. And I think it's worth just discussing to figure out maybe what they're doing better and how our community can adopt some of their practices.
I want to say I feel like this discussion. I think there's two things to say. I feel like this discussion is almost like a retrospective, right? In maybe goal. Like we're talking about some things that maybe could be improved. We're talking about things that have caused some friction, which is the point of a retrospective. Like you talk about, hey, what's going well, what didn't go well, what could we improve? What are things that we should be thinking about? And hopefully we'll highlight some things that maybe the community as a whole could be thinking about and maybe improving upon. I think it's also important to point out that this is coming from a place from people that love Drupal really and truly. This is, and as Nate said, this explicitly isn't an attack on anybody or anything. I think we're just having a conversation about some things that have been bubbling up in the community.
I have a question as far as something that you brought up, and I'm wondering, are we comparing apples to apples, right? So like you bring up Laravel and Next.js, and I'm wondering, like, I mean, I guess at their base, right, they're all frameworks to do something with, right? But I mean, like, Drupal is a web platform, web CMS tool, right? Next.js is a framework for building kind of applications for the web, right? Laravel has many uses to my understanding. I'm wondering, like, do they compare with Drupal? Like, is it a fair comparison, do you think?
I think it's a fair comparison in the sense of if you break down what Drupal is at its core, which is an MVC framework, right? All three of these are MVCs, right? All three of these can handle a model, a view, and a controller. But do they compare in the sense of like adoption in terms of like what organizations, both private and public, would be using them? I think they're vastly different in that context, right? Because you could lay the foundation to say, like, because JavaScript as a whole, that community iterates so quickly, I think it scares large organizations and government to adopt a JavaScript framework, right? And that is an overgeneralization from my perspective. But it is crazy to say, like, if I launch a JavaScript app this year, next year I'm several versions behind in Node if I do not stay on top of them, right? Wherein like PHP's actually been pretty quick now with and Drupal, right? Both PHP and Drupal are on a very regular release cycle. It's just much slower, and I think that in terms of the from a Drupal to Next.js, they are not apples to apples. But I think there's a far closer comparison to a framework like Symfony, even a framework like Laravel, and even a framework like Symfony, right? Which are just bare bone MVC frameworks. They don't offer a user interface out of the box, but they have bundles, plugins, extensions that can turn it into a CMS.
And they both, both Laravel and Drupal are not based on, but build on top of Symfony. So they have that and they're both PHP projects. Laravel is much closer to the framework end of things, I think. I mean, Laravel is a framework, whereas Drupal has some framework pieces, but it's more of a CMS. I mean, from my understanding.
I mean, I think Drupal is a like choose your path, right? Like Drupal is, and that's what's great about Drupal, right? It is not like Laravel where you're restricted to a low-level software engineer. While like there are some conveniences with Laravel, it is not Drupal, right? Like it is Drupal's value, and this is, in my opinion, one of the problems with the popularity of Drupal is like kind of its core marketing strategy when it comes to like its value prop is it is incredible that I could spin up a CMS knowing how to do it, obviously, as a Drupal developer, I can configure content types through a user interface. I don't have to write any code. I can then turn on the views module, create a REST API, and now I have a headless CMS, and I've written zero code, right?
Yeah.
That is really exciting. You can't do that in anything else. You
Yeah,
could.
and to highlight some of those differences, like Silverstripe is another CMS that builds on top of Symfony. And if you're creating fields in your form, it has to be done in code, and you have to make decisions like is this a one-to-many relationship? Is this many-to-many? Like you're making like database level relationship decisions when you're creating the fields at a
You don't have
framework
to
level
think about that with Drupal.
in Drupal.
And
Yeah.
but and I might skip ahead in our notes here, but like this is a really good segue to say, if I go to Drupal.org, I immediately do not know that story. Like, I don't know that when I go to Drupal.org that like I could spin up a headless CMS with zero code in minutes. That story is not taught to me. But if I go to Laravel.com, for instance, the story on Laravel's website is run these commands. You can have a working local setup. Here's this artisan console, which is artisan is like an alias here of Drush, but artisan has a lot of scaffolding tools that offer boilerplate when you want to spin up models and controllers. And
Drush has that too.
Oh, does it really?
Yeah, Drush's generators. I have been using them so much recently. They're so convenient. But yeah, Drush has a lot of
I used the generators in Drupal console years ago, and then I stopped using Drupal console. And when I stopped using it, Drush didn't have the generators then. So that is actually a feature that I was unaware of that Drush has now.
It's great. It does things like it'll ask you which module you want it in. Obviously, if you're doing a custom service, it'll ask you what you want to inject. Like it scaffolds. It's pretty slick. And one thing, you have to have the module installed. So if you're creating a new module, you generate the module, install it, or enable it rather, and then you can generate the next stuff. Don't try to generate something for an uninstalled module, disabled module. But yeah, it's great.
So I mean, I'm hearing a lot of like a lot of positives, right? And we kind of started off with on the premise that like it could be better, right? Or there are improvements that could be made. So I'm wondering, like, what do you view as the enhancements that need to be made to increase the developer experience, or improve the developer experience, I guess I should say, with Drupal?
Yeah, so I just mentioned it. Is one of them is like, it's kind of the marketing story, like the story of Drupal. We do a really good job, right, within our community to talk about how great Drupal is, right? We have this podcast, people talk. You have guests on here regularly, and guest hosts talking about their experience with Drupal and different initiatives. It was an amazing conversation a couple of weeks ago about like recipes and config actions, right? But those are conversations that are really targeted towards people already in the community, right?
Yeah.
And in order to attract customers, right, if we were a business trying to sell a product, right, we would have to have a marketing strategy that is geared towards acquisition. And Drupal CMS, right, is definitely heading that direction in terms of like recipes and saying like, hey, with one button click, you've got this pre-configured Drupal site. But we don't have like that story immediately it hits you when you hit Drupal.org, right? Like there's a lot of high level, like these are the industries that use it.
So yeah, so I mean, I think the marketing initiative for Drupal, right, is relatively new. It was started last year, maybe 2 years ago now at this point. And I think that is working to ramp up, right? So before we got on here, I was watching the Dries note from DrupalCon Barcelona, and Dries was doing a live demo, which if at this point in time, when you're listening to this, you haven't gone to see that Dries note, stop, we'll wait, go watch it, come on back. But Dries does do a live demo where he goes to Drupal.org and, it's new and doesn't look like what Drupal.org looks like today. And it's very much geared towards exactly that, Nate. Somebody who's new to Drupal or has heard about it and is kind of like, I need to know more, right? And then he goes into like kind of like that not the developer experience, but that experience of spinning up a demo of Drupal, right? So I think to your point, like, we're moving in that direction. Is it as fast as some of us might like? No, maybe not. Is it developer focused? No. But if you ask me, like, Drupal has been developer focused for the last 20 plus years. Like, I think our the way we adopt new users is not by, building a better developer community. I mean, I don't get me wrong. That is definitely part of it. Obviously, the platform that we all work on relies heavily on people's time and talent in development and other areas to achieve greatness. But I mean, I think, looking at building community members, right, is something where, I don't think new members to the community necessarily need to be new developers. But, I could be wrong, but I think from a marketing standpoint, there are changes coming. And the last note here is that I was actually in New York for Evolve Drupal NYC this past Friday, and saw a presentation on Drupal's new brand from Sean at Acquia. And, it was really exciting to see kind of the new branding and now see Dries with the new marketing. Like it got me excited from a site builder perspective. I'd be interested once you guys watch it to see if it like kind of did the same thing from a development perspective.
But before we dive into that, I just want to mention that you can visit the new Drupal.org homepage too. We'll have it in the show notes. It's just new.drupal.org, and they're looking for feedback for that too. But yeah, the thing is, I think I'm hearing really what you're looking for is just better marketing from Drupal as a whole, and that's not a new topic. I mean, we've had a couple of episodes. We had the Just Say Drupal episode. Ivan Stegic has been a pretty big proponent of this movement. And I think what I'm hearing too is that, the community is one of the strongest points of Drupal. The community does need agency or, it needs support. And that support comes in the form of having clients, right? And clients are ultimately who we need to market to again. And, I think that's one of the main things that we're discussing. This feels like the other side of the coin of the Just Say Drupal discussion that we've been having.
But I don't know that that's the premise here, right? The premise is to be more attractive to developers, right?
That is definitely not the conversation. The conversation is being more attractive to people in general, right? And I think it's
okay.
I think maybe to add on to that, when something is more developer focused as a technology framework, there would be wider spread adoption, right? Because let's think of a normal scenario outside of an agency. Say I work for a corporation and I am a software engineering leader or technology leader, and my marketing team has come to me with a request to build a website. And I pull my team together and I say, hey, what are some technologies we should use for this website, right? And maybe someone might say, hey, we should use WordPress or we should use Next.js. And someone on the development team or the technology team goes, let's evaluate Drupal, right? Maybe this person is a software engineer who used to work with Drupal back in the day and knows how good it is. But if we don't market to everybody, aka developer focus, having a great developer experience, your developers are your advocates. If you're a good boss, let's say in technology leadership, you're going to listen to your developers. Those are the people with the boots on the ground building these products. If the developers don't like working in the software, they're not going to want to recommend it. And I'm not saying that people don't like to work in Drupal, but I don't think there's enough people working in Drupal. There could be more, right? But once we explain the story about how amazing and powerful Drupal can be, if you know how to use it.
I think one of the problems is that Drupal used to be able to be found by a developer by themselves and kind of bootstrap a project on their own. Yep. Drupal now, for a long time, absolutely requires a team, right? You unless you want to have olive arrow, it requires a team. Like, you need to have a custom theme, you need to have all that set up. And if we're being honest, if you're working on selling a project to a client that has a marketing team, many times you're going to face an uphill battle selling Drupal, because Drupal has a reputation in the marketing community that's not as easy as WordPress to edit and make changes to content. Now, I don't think that reputation, at least nowadays, is valid. I mean, you can certainly build a terrible experience in Drupal, but it's much better than it's been, especially in the last 5 years. But that reputation still persists. I mean, I still, you have to do a lot of demos and convincing sometimes for people that haven't used a modern version of Drupal and have used WordPress. Marketing teams want to use WordPress.
So you guys just said a whole bunch there, and I want to dig into a couple of different pieces of what you said. Nate, let's start with what you were talking about, right? And like, developers want to work in something that makes their lives easier. Like, I think we all agree with that, right? We want to be building stuff that solves difficult problems, not building another web form or building another user login or doing those basic things, right? Drupal does that stuff really, really well. But I think the counterpoint to your argument is, I don't think a lot of developers, I don't think a lot of boots on the ground, and you framed it properly, right? By saying like a good manager, a good leader is going to listen to their developers. But like, I don't know that a lot of developers have a seat at the table to make a decision at an enterprise level of what platform they're kind of building things in, right? It either takes one of two roads, in my opinion. One is somebody has and to Nick's point, a preconceived notion about a certain piece of software or a certain desire to use a certain piece of software. And they say, hey, we're going to use this piece of software. And then it's up to the development team to make a case, right, for why they should or shouldn't use that piece of software. The other side of it is the one that I prefer to lean into, right, is the one where a leader says, hey, we need to solve this problem. What's the best tool to go and solve it? And then a development team or somebody like myself says, well, we've had great success with Drupal, and here's why, right? But, to your point, Nate, I don't think as a community, we often do a good job of empowering solution architects or IT managers or, CTOs with the, hey, why is Drupal a good fit, right? We don't give them the, hey, you can very easily, with a couple of clicks, spin up a headless endpoint for your front end, right? So I do agree with you there that like we could do a better job of kind of presenting ourselves to, upper to middle decision makers in that process, all while making the, developer's life as easy as humanly possible. One question I do have, and this is a question for you, Nate, but it's something that Nick said, right? Often you get into an organization, right? And there is some decision maker, and I had this happen to me last year, right? That was like, oh no, we're not going to use Drupal. Drupal is garbage. And you're like, well, why are you saying that? Well, every Drupal site looks the same. Or, oh, they load slow and they don't work well, right? They've had the experience of Drupal, whether it was Drupal 7 without a caching layer, or a botched implementation of Drupal that just didn't work the way they needed it to. what do you say? How do you persuade somebody or try to change somebody's opinion of that?
Oh, well, this is probably a spicy response, but I typically will respond with that. In a lot of cases, Drupal, in my experience coming into an existing project, is consultantware, not software. Let's break that down. Okay, consultantware. To me, a lot of Drupal sites, because Drupal is so flexible, right, is only as good as the team that built that website, right? The three of us here and many listeners have inherited a pre-built Drupal website before in our careers. And we have all to ourselves thought, what were these people thinking, right? And the result of that is they did the best job possible with the tools that they had. And what tools did they have? Well, up until I think recently, the documentation was a little thin on the Drupal 8 side, Drupal or modern Drupal 8.9 side, right? A couple years ago, I believe Benji Fisher was involved, or maybe still be involved in the documentation initiative. I remember the lightning talks in Drupal Boss and him talking about the work he was doing on that, right? That is greatly improved, right? We have the Drupal cookbook, which in my opinion is buried on Drupal.org. It could really have like a prominent place on the homepage, maybe. And that's amazing. There's also been other members throughout our community that have written, I don't know if there is like a Drupal for Dummies book, right? But you know what I mean? One of those like books that you can find at Barnes & Noble on how to get started, right? But, we need to do a better job as developers, right? To make sure we're obviously understanding what we're doing. But I think in the conversation of like, how do I convince somebody, that Drupal is the right thing? It'd be a lot easier if Drupal.org maybe looked like a Laravel's website, where it's like got some animations that show how easy it is to spin up a website, right? A video. It's more of a product marketing website, right? It showcases what the product is and can do, right? We've mentioned multiple times the headless CMS with zero code that can be stood up in your local development environment.
I mean, even the big, and I think they're working toward this, but the big announcement and the big piece of the demo that I've seen so far with Dries is the AI agents, which I have opinions about AI in general and getting everywhere. But one of the nice things, from preliminary reviews of these demos, one of the nice things about it is these agents are trained specifically on Drupal and Drupal's configuration. Like the config management in Drupal allows AI to understand what it's doing. And so it's really powerful. It looks like it's going to be really powerful at just like configuring stuff. Like, can I create a content type and add a bunch of fields? Yes. Would it be more convenient to just open up a prompt and just say, hey, create me an event content type that has a start date, end date, image, and full text field, and have it just do it in 5 seconds and then just review it and make sure that it's what I meant? Or, to the point, I think we were talking about this before the show, like if you have something categorized, you want to just modify, be like, hey, take all the content that was tagged with X and change that to tag Y or something like that. Like being able to work with your content like that, that's something that Drupal can do. And I'm not convinced that any other open source project is anywhere near being able to do that. I mean, I'm not convinced WordPress will ever be able to do that with unless they do a complete clean break and rebuild from ground up like Drupal did between Drupal 7 and Drupal 8, because they don't have the config management.
That piece of it really is like there's a kind of an open API, right? They're taking kind of the search API approach to AI, where people are going to be able to develop kind of like plugins to support that within Drupal, right? And I'm wondering, like, Nate, do you think that excites developers? That brings people in, like, hey, look at our AI API integration. Like, you can kind of build your own stuff for this. Is that one of the I don't know. Is that one of the levers that would bring in new blood into the developer ecosystem for Drupal?
No, I think that a month ago I got a new washer, and on my washer I have AI sensing.
I would hate that.
Okay,
I'm sorry.
Right.
Can you explain what AI
Wow,
sensing does?
your code
I-
is really dirty today.
I can-
We're gonna have to run this for 20 minutes longer.
Right. Okay. So I cannot tell you what AI sensing does. It sends information to LG's servers, and LG then tells the washer how to wash, right? Based on
It's
whatever.
absurd.
I don't know. Listen to me. So the point I'm trying to make here is that the introduction of, I think, artificial intelligence into Drupal is not for you and me. It's for the marketer, right?
Yeah.
I think that this is another thing that we're doing, another initiative that we're doing through the community that's exciting from a developer perspective. It's exciting the people that are already in the community. I don't think that people, and maybe I'm wrong, I don't think that there are developers out there that are like, I really want to work with Drupal because it has AI. I think
No.
developers are saying, I really want to work with Drupal because I can go to the website and hit get started, which I see on the new design. There is actually a CTA. There's a get started, which is amazing. And it brings me to like a page that gives me a couple commands to run in my terminal, and boom, I'm up and running. That's what would get me excited as a developer that it does with Laravel and Next in this comparison.
Yeah, I don't think the AI stuff is targeting developers. I think it's a similar goal to what we're talking about today, though. I think it's, like you said, it's for marketers. But I think one of the things that would be really healthy for the community is starting to get marketers excited about Drupal 2 and requesting it. So it doesn't become so much of a permanent sales discussion for why to use Drupal. It's they're requesting it because it gives them the flexibility to, I don't know, manage their content better, the flexibility to make small tweaks, to do proof of concepts themselves. I think that's what it helps with.
Yeah.
Will it end up being a silver bullet? Will it end up being useful? I mean, only time can tell. But I think even as a developer, the nice thing about it is if it works as advertised, and I have no reason to believe that it won't at this point, but if it works as advertised, it can help with some of the mundane site building stuff that you need to do sometimes, right? The exciting in recipes will help with that too, right? I can see it being powerful, being like, hey, I need the event recipe, apply it, and now just modify it by chatting with it. So I don't have to go through and find and click all the 10 different checkboxes and forms and UI fields to make the changes that I know need to be made. Like I said,
Yeah.
I also know that it's going to end up with some Frankenstein sites that are worse than we've ever seen in history because it's just if you give that tool out, people will build their own monoliths. But I think it's still an improvement.
I think you're right, Nick. Like I feel like, I feel like the tide of bringing more marketers and more tech leadership into the Drupal space to say like, yes, Drupal is what we want, will then, like with most technologies, require the development community to be more interested in Drupal, right? And that'll help to increase the number of developers that are using it, right? Again, like I don't know that those conversations start with the developer. I'm also, looking at the Laravel homepage, right, as an example. Like, I think we have to be very clear what what we're asking for, right? So, like, I think there should be a for developers page on Drupal.org that looks very similar to what Laravel has on the homepage. But I mean, ultimately, I think the homepage of Drupal.org should be focused more on the no code, low code users that are building sites and trying to use Drupal in that way, as opposed to the development users. So I think you raise a great point there as far as like, hey, if we bring more marketing folks in, like the that will help the other side of the coin.
I think, well, just to focus on like the homepage, for instance, right? I think the new homepage is doing a good job of this, but maybe could improve just slightly more, which is there needs to be two stories that are told here, the non-technical story and the technical story. You need to draw in both audiences with Drupal, right? Because Laravel has what an audience, right? You're not going to get a non-technical person building apps in Laravel. So their marketing is their audience is more targeted and more focused. Exactly, Nick. But we need to be able to tell two stories. Like there are plenty of companies that do both a business to consumer and a business to business model, right? And they might even do business to government, right? And there's plenty of companies out there that are able to tell two stories, three stories about the products, about the type of business they do and the products that they offer. And I think it's just I think it is important that we focus on that. And I don't want the pendulum as a person in this community, I don't want the pendulum to swing in the wrong direction. Meaning we're doing a lot of focusing. John, your points are 100% valid. Is focusing on the non-technical user, marketers, site builders. I'm 100% for these initiatives that have been happening the last couple of years. But I don't want the pendulum to swing in the wrong direction where we won't be able to have no code tools. We won't be able to have site building tools without attracting more developers to the community. We're going to reach a point in the next decade where some core contributors are going to age out of this business, right? Like 2 decades, right? Like there is a finite number of years that we have as humans to be able to work. No, and maybe we only want to work to a certain age, right? We just have to keep that in mind. We want to make sure that we're fostering the next generation of Drupal developers, the next generation of Drupal marketers and users.
Yeah. I don't disagree with that. Like I'm fully on board with like attracting more developers and making Drupal as easy for developers as it is for site builders, right? But I wonder how much of this is the tail wagging the dog or the dog wagging the tail, right? Like are the developers going where the market is going, right? React, Next, Laravel. And then if the market shifts to go back towards, again, pendulum is a great way to describe this, right? If it shifts back into like, hey, we want to use Drupal, will developers naturally just migrate back into that and maybe need to dust off their skills or brush up on their skills if they don't have them. But like, is that kind of the natural flow of things? Like, I don't know. I don't know that I can answer that question. I don't know that any of us can really answer that question.
Yeah.
I mean, it's all about market conditions. It's the basis of this conversation. The more developers that use a framework, the higher adoption that there are, right? Like there are people like we're individual contributors, right? And maybe we get to a management position one day and we're in charge of a large organization and someone says, hey, I want to build a website. I'm going to say Drupal, right? Because I have a great experience with Drupal. And once you start having more of those people in those positions make those decisions, then yeah, the pendulum starts swinging the other direction. It's just natural. But it's all a game of marketing. Vercel, who owns Next.js, right? Even though it's an open source project, they're really good at marketing. Taylor Otwell, the founder of Laravel, you follow him on X. He's an amazing marketer of his own product, right?
Yeah.
And I think Dries does a really good job to make sure it's not about him and that it's about the community. But I think like this is a community effort to really go out there and make this an exciting thing for other people to use.
I think one of the other things that's exciting to me about this, like you're not as I mentioned, you're not the only one to bring this up. I mean, when we had, I think, Batty on the first time, we talked about how there's been an initiative to start bringing Drupal as Drupal to web conferences, right?
Yeah.
Like there was never, like some companies might go to various web conferences. Like Drupal didn't have any core contributors go to SymphonyCon last year, which is like, so there's an initiative to start fixing some of those things, which is not just purely marketing, but it is marketing, right? If you don't have a presence, you
Yeah.
can't You can't talk to people.
I mean, Drupal should, in my opinion, right? Like Drupal should have a booth at SymphonyCon, right?
Yeah.
Drupal's a main is a large consumer of Symfony, and there are so many similarities. I work in both frameworks day to day, and there are still similarities. Hopping between the two frameworks is just night and day for me now, right? And like we should definitely have a presence there. We should have a presence at Laravel, like Laracon as well.
Like those are things that are in the works, right? So like as Nick said, like I think that was last year. They went to was it open source web or one of those big web conferences with the new marketing campaign, a brand new booth with all of the Drupal focused stuff. But I think the goal is to do exactly that, Nate, is to go to more, technology conferences as opposed to Drupal specific things.
So moving back to developer specific, Nate, do you have any thoughts on tooling that the community could use, that the developer community for Drupal could use on tooling?
I mean, what would be what would probably excite me and like scratch the itch that I have when looking at something like Laravel or Next.js, right? Next.js has an advantage because it's the event loop within Next.js. You can do some great things like run a web server, right? PHP doesn't really have that option. I mean, we can do like local PHP server, but the steps to spin up a JavaScript app are pretty easy. You can run npx and just download the package and run it real time, or you can run, npm install, npm run start, right? Or npm run serve, whatever. And I can get a local development environment up in minutes. What I really would like out of Drupal is like, I want like that excitement around getting started. And I would love for Drupal to standardize on tooling with a local development environment. So I think like several years ago, I was a big Lando person, but with the introduction of the silicon chip in Apple computers, I find using Lando much more difficult compared to an Intel processor. And I've just run into many more issues with like Docker desktop specifically. I think DDev, and I'm probably amongst a lot of people in the community who have switched from Lando to DDev. I think DDev is phenomenal. The support for different Docker agents like Kalima with Mutagen, it is so fast. And it feels like I'm running containers on Linux. So it would be amazing if we had like a getting started page and it's like, hey, copy this command into your terminal. And maybe the getting started page is for marketers, for developers. And there's two different paths here, right? And maybe there's a live demo with Simply Test that the marketers could go to. And there's the command prompt steps that maybe it's like 2 commands: composer, project create project, and then there's ddev start. Bam, I've got a local development environment. That would be amazing.
Yeah, I think that's actually my one worry about the WebAssembly version. Like, if you're how much does that rely on the hardware of the person installing it, right? If they're using some underpowered corporate laptop and trying to run Drupal and WebAssembly on their computer, is that first experience going to be great, or are they going to think that Drupal's slow just because they're not running it on an actual server?
Oh man, I think that's like, it's 2024. I think that the concern of like resources on people's computers.
Okay, let's say phone. What about phone? People are going to try to start that on their phone. What's going to happen?
Using the silicon chips, like, fair assessment again, but Apple started using silicon on their phones, like 6 years ago? And they all have a ton of memory in them as well. Like, it'll be interesting to see. I don't want to count it. I don't want to count it up, because think about it. You can think about your PHP settings when you run them in on a Linux server, right? In DigitalOcean, for instance. I only need like a 1 gigabyte droplet to run my SQL in Apache and PHP.
Fair enough.
So I want to step back to something you said about like local development, right? And like, people are developing modules, people are contributing back to the ecosystem. Like, does Drupal really need to be opinionated about what its local development environment is? Like, isn't that a turnoff to developers when somebody comes in and goes, "Hey, this is what you're going to use and you're going to like it"?
I think that if you look at what has recently occurred, I'd say recently, but what has occurred over the years with Laravel is that like they have a standard development process and they have iterated on that over the years. There was Valet years ago.
Yeah.
And I think there's Laravel Herd now, which is the most recent like local development environment that's popular. But what I'm getting at is like it is baked into their documentation. It is baked into like their community model, right?
Okay.
Everyone's kind of drinking the Kool-Aid here, right? We don't have an instance where like I go on one project and they're running MAMP. I go on another project. I say that for you, John, because you were like the biggest holdout with MAMP that I know.
There are still people.
And what I'm getting at is like we went through Vagrant with Drupal VM, and then we went through Lando, right? If we really all got behind like something like DDEV, right, and the association did as well, like there could actually be like corporate funding for like development of this, and even more if there isn't.
There is an issue on Drupal.org to kind of like standardize, air quotes, standardize around DDEV, right? But I also think like one thing that was nice about Lando was that like you had the ability to have like, and I'm going to use this term and it's going to confuse people because now we have Drupal recipes, but there were like recipes in Lando where you could, you know, basically have a Pantheon recipe or a Drupal recipe, and it would just basically build you a local environment, right? So like, I mean, I think what you're proposing here, Nate, is that like DDEV have that kind of like recipe builder where you could say, you know, DDEV build Drupal, and it would say, okay, well, do you want Drupal 10? Do you want Drupal 11? Like, and you could just go through some prompts and it would just basically build you a Drupal site using, you know, maybe the standard install profile or maybe a set of recipes that, you know, that you want to build your site with. But I mean, I think that could be, I mean, I think that's interesting. I think the community is kind of working in that direction. Maybe not as a like you have to do it this way, but as a, hey, this is the easy path that we've defined for you. You can forge your own if you like.
I have to say that maybe there's a blog post in here eventually about something like this, but it comes back to, I think, the ecosystem discussion. I think like one of the powers of Drupal and open source is that you can there's multiple ways to process things, right? You can build, if you don't like web form, you can build your own form builder. You could you could use Contact or, you know, something like that. But there's also a lot of power in having the ecosystem module, like the one way web form, I think is one of the biggest strengths of Drupal. Like there's generally one accepted way to build forms. And if you want to modify it, you build on top of web form. WordPress has so many different ways, and you know, if you're using other plugins with WordPress, they may not support the one that you chose, or the developer of that module now has to support the APIs of 4 different modules, plugins, because, you know, their users are using Gravity Forms or ACF or something else, right? So I think one of the strengths of Drupal is, you know, I think it's great that there was there is Doxel, there is Lando, there is DDEV, there is there was what was the other one? Docker for Drupal or something. And I built my own back in the day. But there is something to be said to, you know, pool resources behind one development environment, right? You do have, you know, pseudo recipes in DDEV. You have the ability to tie in directly with platform. You have the ability to tie in directly with Acquia or, you know, any of the big organizations. I think in general, the Drupal Association is careful not to throw its weight behind one particular thing, but the community, especially over the last few years, has consolidated behind DDEV. You know, Lando is I think, doing some interesting things with their plugin system, but I haven't seen a whole lot of movement back to Lando in that direction. The movement has been to DDEV. But it's also hard to make that recommendation because the people behind Doxel and the people behind Lando have put huge amounts of effort into those projects as well, right? So I don't know what to say there, but
I think
yeah,
actually, I think you do know what to say, right? But it's like every option has a valid reason to use it, right? And I think it's like very important to highlight like the work that the Lando team has done and the work that the Doxel team has done and like Jeff Geerling, how many years he spent maintaining Drupal VM with Vagrant, right?
yeah,
And
yeah,
I just I don't think it's wrong at the end of the day to standardize on something that is going to improve our day-to-day experience. And I think that too, like there are shortcomings with DDEV. I find DDEV far more complicated to set up a local development environment than I did with Lando. With Lando, I could spin something up in like 3 lines of code in a YAML file, right? And with DDEV, you've got to go through the scaffolding with DDEV config for it to scaffold all these files for you to even use it, right? And I think that there's so many configuration options with DDEV, it's overwhelming compared to Lando that offers a like much more user friendly user experience with a much scaled back options. So like I think that consolidation of these teams and features could really make a really great local development experience than having 5 different projects with, you know, one of them does something different that's really good, but you know, lacks maybe a feature something else may have.
yeah.
So I don't know. This is probably a philosophical conversation around like capitalism and competition and consolidation, right? Like it,
Yeah,
but it
yeah.
follows basically the same principles.
Yeah, like, and that's it. That's it exactly. Like, their competition is helpful. I mean, I'm convinced that Lando, Doxel, and DDEV each pushed each other to innovate, right? And if they had but at some point, does consolidation help, right? I think we would be in a worse place if web form wasn't the way to do it. And that's not to say that things don't sometimes come out in similar spaces, right? You can use rules still, or you can use ECA, and they both, rules was the way to do it in Drupal 7. ECA has seemed to become the way to do it in Drupal 9, 10, and 11. But that's not to say that competition can't come out for a particular space if there seems to be a use case for it. But yeah, I don't know. It's hard. It's a hard question.
So going back to like tooling, right? And I feel like we talked about that a bit ago, but I'm wondering, like, there have been recent improvements on Drupal.org, right? To the tooling to kind of get them more in line with like the way developers are used to doing things, right? Less patches, more merge requests, moving to GitLab, integrating GitLab more into Drupal.org issues and the issue queue, right? Like, do you feel like that stuff has, helped to maybe not attract developers, but to make developers' lives easier, right? When interacting with Drupal.org, contributing to Drupal.org?
I'm pausing because I think my feelings is like it's probably like I feel like my position on a lot of our conversation today has been like progression and I feel regressive saying what I'm saying. I liked the patch system better than what we have now. And maybe that's just my personal preference, but like I feel like because we have the issue queues are in Drupal and the code is in GitLab, like I want them to be either in one place or the other. I don't want them to be in 2 places. And I feel like maybe someone new coming to our community might not even understand how to really follow this process very easily. I think that like the community itself has done a really great job updating like documentation. Like this is how you open a merge request. This is how you do it. Like there's prompts now as you're going through the process, and that's awesome. It's a lot better than what it used to be. Um, but like maybe I would love to see us use maybe GitLab issues, and those GitLab issues are in the projects in GitLab, similar to how Laravel and Next.js has a GitHub project, and those issues and pull requests are in those projects.
I see where you're coming from. I will say the one thing I miss about patches is it was very easy to get point in time feedback from the community from people that weren't. There's a lot of people that just use patches and give feedback like, yes, it works for me, or it applies in this version, which in the grand scheme of the issue isn't generally the most helpful, but it is useful sometimes to see when something stopped working for a particular patch if you're trying to modify it. We
Yep.
kind of lost that. You lose that with merge requests, right? Because you don't know when somebody created their own patch or when, like what commit they were on. You lose a little bit of that. I will say reviewing merge requests versus a patch is miles better. It's
Correct.
impossible. It's impossible to review patches. I have no idea how any patch that was non-trivial ever got into Drupal core, because reviewing those, oh God, I never want to do that again.
I think though, Nick, we like may have a bit of like Stockholm syndrome because we've been dealing with the like difficulty of reviewing changes and patches, right? And how difficult it was over the years that like we're like, oh, well, you know, GitLab is like it's better, but like it
Yeah.
just feels incomplete, right? And I think
Yeah.
the changes to GitLab are a massive improvement for merge requests and doing reviews in there. But like I just want it to
Be
feel
in
a
one
little
place.
more connected.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think, Mike, the only concern I have there, and I think this is something that's top of mind for the Drupal Association as they're building this out, I'm worried. I think having the stuff on Drupal.org makes it feel, it helps the community enforce that modules are for the community and that contributions should be done to an existing module if possible. If things move to purely to GitLab, my concern would be, or I mean, it's going to be GitLab, but like other projects are in GitHub, people end up creating their own module. Like you don't end up having a central place for modules. You don't have a way, and that there's pluses and minuses to this situation, but like I've adopted several modules that people just stopped contributing to. And I have clients that need them. There's a way to do that in Drupal. You can't do that in other projects. You can fork it, right? But you can't do that in other projects. But now you have 5 forks of a project that 5 different people are maintaining, and you don't know which one is the most up to date. You don't know, like you kind of have a history and an audit log for modules when they're on Drupal.org. And when the issues leave, does that mean the modules are now in GitLab? Does that start to encourage more fragmentation of modules? Does that, I mean,
So for me, it feels like a natural split, right? Because like I see exactly what you're saying, Nick. Like Drupal.org is kind of the what of the equation. Like what can I do with Drupal? Like here are the list of modules that I can use to improve my site, right? Whereas Git lab is the like, you know, where's the code, where can I update the code, where can I put a merge request, right? I think one aspect that we're kind of leaving out of this conversation, which is an important one and what makes Drupal unique, is the credit system and the fact that if we were to move completely to GitLab, right, that the credit system isn't necessarily built into GitLab yet, right? It could be.
Yeah, but I
in the
mean, you could
future.
just use the GitLab API and grab commits. Honestly,
I
well,
mean,
but that
sure,
doesn't account for non-code contributions or like
right.
reviews.
no, I get
So
what
I
you're
mean,
saying. Yeah, but
so I
like,
mean,
I
like,
don't think you would move the module pages or the project pages. I don't think the project pages. I don't think go to GitLab, right? Like, there's already a project page technically there, because you can use like a wiki. But I envision it, the project page on Drupal.org to be like a project page on packages.com, right? Like they're separate things that reference.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean,
Right?
isn't that what's happening right now, though? Like, I mean,
No,
that is. What do you mean no?
I mean,
the
like
issues are on Drupal.org. The
yeah,
code is
the
in
issues are in
GitLab.
Drupal.org. The code is in GitLab. I would even say too that like the tagged releases and like launching something are entirely separate on Drupal.org than they are in GitLab, right? You can still
And that's
push
not even
tags
taking security
and then
releases into
exactly,
account.
So I mean, I
right?
think there is an effort. If I may be misremembering Tim's roadmap here, but I mean, I think there is an effort to try to like unify those, right? And I think I think it is bringing the issues into GitLab, right? So I mean, like, feels like a lot of what we're talking about today is like it's not moving fast enough. I mean, I think we are moving in that direction with our marketing. I think we are moving in that direction with our tooling. But we want it now, damn it.
Well, I think that kind of brings us to our final question, which is, and I feel like this is the biggest thing behind Drees's initiative starting last DrupalCon, which is Starshot, right? It's that people are aware of some issues, some concerns, some friction, some things that need to change, and the Drupal community has been moving towards that stuff. But a lot of especially these bigger initiatives, take an extremely long time. Like Project Browser has been being worked on for 4 or 5 years now, right? And they've been working consistently on that. Eh, I think a lot of Starshot feels like to me about, okay, can we get higher velocity? Can we cut some red tape? Can we get some things in? Because the community needs to solve some of these problems faster than they have. Even things like big organizations move slowly too. So I'm not saying that this isn't unique to Drupal. This isn't unique to open source. But if there's a company that decides that they want to start having a bigger presence in conferences or things like that, well, they can make that happen in a couple of months, right? The Drupal Association has slowly started doing that, but I expect it to be a couple of years before they really have the full plan in place and they have a booth at SymphonyCon, for example, if that's the direction that they decide to move. Part of that's because we're a community made up of many different companies, organizations, and people, right?
Yep.
So a lot, there's a lot of care made in these types of decisions, but but I think a lot of us, I feel like Starshot's, like the core piece of Starshot is, can we just be more targeted? Can we cut some red tape? Can we increase velocity?
I do think though that it cuts out something I mentioned earlier. Starshot cuts out the consultantware part of Drupal, right? Or it attempts to accomplish the consultantware problem, which is it gives you that boilerplate. It gives you that that feeling that when you install WordPress and things just work and things are turned on, right? It gives you that feature set where like today, it depends on the developer who's building the website. Are they going to install SecKit? Are they going to install the coffee module? Are they going to configure a blog post with its views, right? Like we are an amazing thing to mention, Nick. Like we are moving very quickly in that regard. And
I think that highlights one of the biggest issues that I've seen. Like Drupal has such power. Like I've never seen, unless it's in something like Facebook or something, I've never seen a project that handles the images like Drupal, right?
The image API in Drupal is, again, marketing, Nick. Like we should be screaming this from the rooftop. But the image API is phenomenal.
But it takes effort to set up. Like and it's very difficult to just make generic decisions, right?
Yeah.
It's difficult. Like it's per site, per design, per all that stuff. Whereas WordPress feels like it just works. You turn that stuff up, but the decisions that WordPress makes, that WordPress makes are mind-boggling. And if you decide you want to implement something like Drupal's system that's more responsive to the needs of a particular page or instance, like it just doesn't, like you end up, you start faster in WordPress, but when you have to customize or get any of, like WordPress doesn't have config management. It would take thousands of hours to get something like config management in.
To be clear here, Nick, when you say mind-boggling, that's a negative, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
like,
okay.
So WordPress like you define in general out of the box, you define sizes for your images in WordPress. And when you upload an image, it says, okay, how big is this image? Let me find every single size smaller than this image and generate that image immediately.
Yep.
There's no like decision. And then it just says, okay, I have a 100 by 100 image. If the screen size is 100 by 100, that's what I'll show. It doesn't there's no like, okay, well, this is 50% of the width, so I need a 500 wide image. There's no like, oh, this image is missing. Let me grab the original image and generate the preset again. None of that infrastructure exists. Another thing, like going back, config management doesn't exist in WordPress, right? You don't have an idempotent way. I guess config management really isn't idempotent, but you don't have a way to deploy changes like that to WordPress. Like this managed displays, like you don't have a system for managing that stuff in WordPress. And if you wanted to build those things in WordPress, it would take you hundreds or thousands of hours. And those things just come out of the box in Drupal. The problem is Drupal, because it's not opinionated until Drupal CMS comes out, you have to build that stuff manually, each project.
Yeah.
And agencies have like starter kits and databases and things, but those take a lot of effort.
So I think two areas there, right? First of all, I kind of am starting to despise the fact that people are calling Drupal CMS opinionated, right? I think it's just trying to be.
But it's not a bad thing that it's opinionated, John.
Yeah,
because it is.
It's explicitly opinionated. That's the whole point of it.
I don't know. So again, going back to the Dries note today, if you look at the installer, right, I think it's just trying to be more helpful to get people to what they need faster, right?
By making opinions about how those things should work.
That's explicitly the point of it. It's opinionated.
It's taking input. It's taking input from the person configuring it, like, and making choices. So is that opinionated? Yeah. Yes. I don't know. I seem to think I tend to want to say it's being more being more helpful at getting you to where you want to go faster. But I think what we're going to start to see with Starshot is, Drupal CMS, is that once it comes out, or at least this is the hope, right? That once it comes out, if it delivers on all of the promises, we're going to have an ability for a no code or low code user to come into the Drupal space and be a new user to Drupal, right? So I think, don't quote me on these stats, but I think like if you look at the Squarespace community on like Facebook, it has like 20 to 40,000 users in it, right? If Drupal were to get even a quarter of those as new users into their ecosystem, that would be, in my opinion, huge, right? And once you have that influx of new users, I think that you're going to start to see more developer adoption. You're going to start to see more people wanting to do more interesting things in the Drupal space, right? So I think that, don't get me wrong, I think we should still work on our tooling. We should still work on, the DevRel aspects of Drupal to ensure that we're being nice to our Drupal developers, right? But I think I think we're going to see, Starshot shift us into a direction of growth, or at least I hope.
I really respect your opinion, but it might be wrong. I'm just joking.
I guess we'll have to wait and see.
I think it does not need to be developer focused, John. We just need a hype machine at its simplest form, right? Around using Drupal.
Yeah.
Getting excited about the image API, right? At something other than DrupalCon. Because we're just talking to each other. Like, it'd be amazing to go to an open source conference and talk about how amazing the image API is.
I think those are some of the key things, like permissions and roles in Drupal. Like, you have to build those manually in so many other situations, and it's so much extra work.
Nate, that should be your next talk. It should be called Drupal Hype Machine, and you should just go through all of the great things that Drupal does, and like just bring it to all of the like non-Drupal conferences out there. I think your calling, Nate.
I could channel Erlich Bachman from Silicon Valley and ride a unicorn, and we can build hype over our product.
I think workspaces is going to be a big one too. I just started working with it the other day, like testing it out. My God,
workspaces. Like the only thing with workspaces is it needs better support with JSON API. I mentioned a lot of headless things here, but there is an issue with the JSON API specification with revisions, and because workspaces
in UI IDs, like it works. Yep. Okay.
Once we find some synergy there amongst every other thing in our world of Drupal, right? Like,
we'll be programming note. We'll be having future episodes in the next couple of weeks on recipes, on workspaces, and all of the fun things, including the trial experience for Drupal. So definitely stay tuned. We're going to be talking about all of those things.
Yeah, I feel like we should have had scheduled 3 hours for this particular episode because I feel like we barely scratched the surface, and I think it's going to be a little bit more fun to edit than usual because we went off on so many tangents. But Nathan, thank you for coming up with this topic and joining us for the last 4 weeks.
I will say before we end that when I first started working with Drupal, John was one of the people who taught me how to use it. And
that's too bad.
I know, isn't it? So from a sentimental note, I think that I would like to not have, you guys are the few people in my career that have made an impact. Nick, I started working with you early on as well, right? To allow me to know and how to use Drupal where I am today. I feel fortunate to have the conversation with you guys today because you both have been in the community for a long time, and both code and non-code contributions you guys have done over the years, like you guys have a lot of perspective on the topic of how we can improve based on your experience.
And I appreciate that. It's hard because I feel like this whole conversation, I feel the need to defend Drupal, right? But I don't think Drupal needs defense. Drupal is strong. I think Drupal, the community is great, but if we bury our heads in the sand and don't discuss things that could be improved, even if it's a little uncomfortable, that ends in misery too. So yeah.
The uncomfortable is what causes growth, right? When you're uncomfortable, the best outcome is that you're growing. So I think that's a natural evolution. Do you have questions or feedback? Reach out to Talking Drupal on Twitter with the handle Talking Drupal, or by email with show@talkingdrupal.com. You can connect with our hosts and other listeners on Drupal Slack in the Talking Drupal channel.
And you can promote your Drupal community event on Talking Drupal. Learn more at talkingdrupal.com/tdpromo.
Get the Talking Drupal newsletter to learn more about our guest hosts, show news, upcoming shows, and much more. Sign up for the newsletter at talkingdrupal.com/newsletter.
Thank you, patrons, for supporting Talking Drupal. Your support is greatly appreciated. You can learn more about becoming a patron at talkingdrupal.com and choosing Become a Patron. All right, Nathan, if our listeners want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
So like the first episode, you can text me 401-753-3313. Hit me up if you want to talk Drupal or need a Drupal developer. You can email me, nathan@dentzau.com, or find me on the Drupal Slack or drupal.org at Nathan Dentzau.
And John, how about you?
Before I sign off for this episode, Nate, as always, pleasure having you. Feel free to come back anytime you have any other hot topics you want to talk about, or even relatively cool ones. Let us know. We'd love to have you.
Thank you.
For me, I'm John Picozzi. You can find me on all the major social networks as well as Drupal.org at John Picozzi. And you can find out more about EPAM at epam.com.
And you can find me pretty much everywhere at Nixvan, NICXVAN.
And if you've enjoyed listening, we've enjoyed talking.
Thanks, everybody. Like a pro, that guy.